Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. There comes a moment when heaven stops whispering warnings and starts swinging consequences. That moment is exactly where this story begins. Because what happened to you wasn't a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, or one of those things happen situations people like to sweep under a rug. No, this was coordinated disrespect dressed as concern, cruelty packaged as care, and torment disguised as just joking. These people didn't slip into wickedness. They dove head first, arms wide open, confident that God wasn't watching. Spoiler alert, he was watching with HD clarity, zoomed in and taking notes like an investigator who doesn't miss a single detail. Here's a fact that'll hit differently. Psychology shows that when a group collaborates in mistreating one innocent person, they unconsciously bond through shared guilt, hoping the harm feels justified. They didn't unite because you were a threat. They united because they needed each other to feel less ashamed of what they were doing to you. But the human mind can disguise wrongdoing only so long. The spiritual realm doesn't play along with delusion. And that's why God is furious. You weren't dealing with people who made spontaneous mistakes. You were dealing with people who rehearsed their wickedness. They plotted their lines, practiced their expressions, and delivered their cruelty like actors auditioning for best villain in a lifetime of bad decisions. And honestly, some of them took the role a little too seriously. If there was an award ceremony in hell, a few would be giving acceptance speeches. But here's the plot twist they never saw coming. They tortured an innocent while heaven was monitoring like a protective parent sitting in the front row, waiting for someone, anyone, to try their child. They thought your silence meant vulnerability. They thought your kindness meant permission. They thought your humility meant you had no backup. They didn't realize you were spiritually surrounded by forces that don't need to flex to be feared. And now, God isn't just angry. He's actively correcting the narrative they built. He's unraveling their lies thread by thread, exposing what they did in the shadows and demanding honor on the very name they tried to bury. This isn't karma. This isn't coincidence. This is a divine response to a human violation. So sit tight, because what's unfolding next isn't just justice. It's reparations, restoration, revelation, and a level of divine outrage that makes even the angels sit up straighter. Number one, God is enraged because they tried to punish purity as if it were a crime. There's a different kind of anger that rises in the spiritual realm when someone harms a person who genuinely meant no wrong. Not the anger that comes from ego or pride, but the anger that comes from seeing innocence being turned into a target. That's what happened to you. You weren't walking around causing chaos or trying to make anyone feel less than. You were just living your life, being yourself, minding your own path. Yet for some reason, they treated your purity like it was suspicious, inconvenient, or offensive. They couldn't stand the way your presence exposed what they were hiding. Your honesty poked holes in their manipulations. Your heart made their bitterness look unnecessary. Your calm made their drama look childish. Instead of rising to your level, they dragged you through things you had no business experiencing. They punished you for qualities they secretly wished they had. And the strange part is, they tried to make it look justified, as if kindness is something that deserves interrogation, or as if innocence should be dragged into court without evidence. God doesn't play about that. Heaven holds a special amount of fire for people who harm those who weren't fighting, weren't scheming, weren't pretending. When someone with a clean heart gets treated like a criminal for simply being themselves, it hits a spiritual nerve. They didn't just hurt you, They insulted the one who made you. They acted like they had the authority to judge a soul they didn't create. And God saw every moment of that injustice. They tried to stain what he intentionally made pure. They tried to twist your character into something ugly so theirs wouldn't stand out. And they tried to place a burden of guilt on someone who didn't earn it, didn't deserve it, and didn't contribute to it. Heaven doesn't tolerate that kind of inversion. That's why the backlash they're facing isn't random, it's a correction. A divine reminder that purity is not a weakness, and innocence is never a crime. Number 2, they mishandled a soul heaven personally endorsed, and that is the offense God will not overlook. There are certain people on this earth who walk with a kind of quiet approval from God that others don't easily recognize. You're one of them. Your life has always had signs, protections, redirections, and moments that didn't make sense to outsiders. You weren't moving through life alone. You were being guided, guarded, and grown by a force much bigger than you. But the people who harmed you couldn't see that. Or maybe they saw it and ignored it. Either way, they treated someone heaven endorsed like you were disposable. They handled you recklessly, as if you were an object they could use and toss aside. They acted like your kind heart was weakness, like your patience was stupidity, like your empathy made you easy to manipulate. They tested you, pushed you, drained you, and tried to break you, all while thinking you had no spiritual backing. What they didn't understand is that when God puts his hand on someone, he takes their mistreatment personally. He didn't just watch the disrespect, he counted it. They touched a life that wasn't theirs to wound. They interfered with a destiny they didn't build. They stepped into a story without reading the part where heaven had already claimed you as his own. That is where they crossed the line. People forget that divine endorsement doesn't mean perfection, it means purpose. And any time someone tries to destroy a person with purpose, they end up fighting against God himself. Their biggest mistake wasn't the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, or the cruelty. It was believing they had the right to mishandle what God valued. They thought they were dealing with just another person. They weren't. They were dealing with someone who had spiritual favor they didn't bother to recognize. And now the consequences they're facing aren't random misfortunes. They're direct responses to the disrespect they showed. God will not overlook what they did. Not because you demanded payback, but because heaven refuses to let anyone mishandle what it has already blessed. Number 3, God's fury rises because they demanded loyalty while giving you wounds. One of the boldest forms of hypocrisy is when people expect devotion, support, and unwavering loyalty from someone they themselves are breaking. That's exactly what happened to you. The same people who hurt you wanted you to stand by them. They expected you to forgive quickly, forget easily, and keep showing up as if you weren't bleeding from the very hands you were reaching toward. They acted entitled to your presence, even while they were the ones causing your pain. They wanted your heart but gave you stress. They wanted your trust but fed you betrayal. They wanted your understanding but offered you nothing but excuses. They created the wounds, then acted offended when you couldn't keep holding them together. And through it all, they made it seem like you were the ungrateful one. They had this strange belief that you owed them something, as if your love was an endless resource they could drain without ever having to replenish. God saw how hard you tried to make things work. He watched you keep choosing grace in moments where others would have chosen vengeance. He saw you swallow your pride, your hurt, and your confusion just to keep the peace. You stayed present even when you were pushed away. You stayed kind even when they twisted your words. You stayed loyal even when loyalty was the last thing you were receiving. But loyalty is not a one-way contract. God doesn't bless relationships where one person is expected to carry all the weight while the other person creates all the damage. These people acted like they were doing you a favor by being in your life, when really you were the blessing holding things together. They didn't realize how much of your strength they were using until God started removing you from places you were never supposed to bleed in. That's where God's fury comes in. He doesn't stay silent when a good-hearted person is being emotionally extorted. He doesn't allow people to demand your loyalty while handing you heartbreak. When someone abuses access to your heart, heaven steps in. Their entitlement didn't go unnoticed, and now neither will your healing. Number 4, their cruelty became the evidence against them, not your reactions. One thing people always forget is that God doesn't run investigations the way humans do. Humans get distracted by emotions, by gossip, by appearances, by who can tell the story the loudest or the most dramatically. But God looks at the root, not the performance. He pays attention to the moment things were set in motion, not the chaos that followed. And when it came to your situation, the truth was painfully simple. You were reacting to pain they created. They were the architects of the destruction, and heaven took note of that from day one. They tried to flip the script by acting shocked at your responses. They pretended to be the victims while sweeping their actions under the carpet. They did you wrong, then gaslit you for having normal human reactions to being hurt. You could have cried, gone quiet, walked away, snapped, or even tried to explain yourself. None of it changed the basic truth that they struck first. They planted the seed, then pretended the tree grew on its own. But here's the part they didn't expect. God doesn't judge the reaction of the wounded. He judges the intention of the one who caused the wound. He saw how they planned the disrespect. He saw how they whispered behind your back while smiling in your face. He saw how they stirred confusion and then acted like peacemakers. And he saw how every injury you carried began with their hands, not yours. You weren't lashing out. You were surviving. You weren't dramatic. You were defending yourself. You weren't unstable. You were overwhelmed by repeated attacks they refused to take accountability for. Heaven separates reaction from initiation, and that's why the weight of judgment is falling on them, not you. They positioned themselves as victims while being the hunters. They chased, provoked, manipulated, and cornered you, then cried foul when you finally responded in ways any human would. But their cruelty wrote the story long before you ever spoke a word. It became the evidence, the testimony, and the undeniable truth God used to validate you. When the hunter lies about being the prey, heaven exposes the tracks. And this time, every track leads straight back to them. Number 5. They tortured you as if your suffering would elevate their status, but all it did was expose their spiritual poverty. There are people who believe that stepping on someone else somehow lifts them higher. They think that if they can hurt you, embarrass you, or weaken you, they'll automatically rise in the eyes of others. That twisted mindset is exactly what fueled their behavior toward you. They weren't just cruel for no reason. They were cruel because they thought your pain would expand their power. They believed that if you looked broken, they would look strong. If you looked confused, they would look wise. If you looked hurt, they would look justified. Their entire sense of worth depended on seeing you diminished. But the universe doesn't operate on that kind of logic. Spiritual laws don't reward destruction for the sake of ego. What they didn't realize is that every moment they spent trying to tear you down was actually revealing the emptiness inside them. Your suffering didn't elevate them. It made their intentions visible. The more they tried to shame you, the more they exposed their insecurity. The more they tried to hurt you, the more obvious their weakness became. Someone who is truly powerful never needs to crush anyone innocent. Someone who is truly respected never needs to humiliate someone who did nothing to deserve it. Their cruelty didn't build a kingdom. It built a case against their character, their motives, and their spiritual condition. People began to see them for who they really were. Not leaders, not strong personalities, not influential figures, but individuals starving for validation they could never earn on their own. And the truth is, when people try to elevate themselves by pushing someone pure down, they expose just how little they have within themselves. That's why God rejects their entire approach. Heaven will never support a rise built on someone else's suffering. God doesn't tolerate spiritual leeches, people who drain others just to feel alive. He doesn't bless cruelty, manipulation, or humiliation disguised as strength. And he especially doesn't stand by while his innocent ones are used as stepping stones for broken egos. They thought hurting you was a shortcut to status. Instead, it became the mirror that showed everyone their spiritual bankruptcy. Their actions didn't elevate them. They only confirmed how low they truly were. Number 6, God's wrath is triggered when a gentle soul becomes a playground for the wicked. There's a special kind of anger that rises in heaven when someone gentle gets targeted simply because they don't fight dirty. Some people mistake softness for submission, kindness for cluelessness, and patience for powerlessness. They convince themselves that because you didn't snap back, because you didn't scream, because you didn't retaliate, you were easy to use, easy to push, easy to control. They treated your calm spirit like an open field where they could dump their baggage, their bitterness, and their brokenness. And they crossed a spiritual line that was never meant to be crossed. The meek are not weak, they're protected. They're the ones God personally shelters because their hearts reflect the parts of him the world often ignores: compassion, mercy, humility, and grace. But the wicked see these qualities and think they've found a playground, a place to exercise their cruelty without consequences. They view gentle souls as emotional punching bags, believing they can take advantage without ever being held accountable. They didn't understand that your restraint wasn't fear. It was heaven telling you not to lower yourself to their level. And while they misread your silence, heaven was reading their intentions. God saw how they pushed you past your limits just to see if you would break. He saw how they repeatedly tested your goodness, hoping they could twist it into something ugly. He saw how they took your kindness and used it as an invitation to disrespect you. That's why divine judgment started moving. Not because you cried, not because you struggled, but because they used your gentleness as an excuse to unleash their wickedness. Do not provoke the meek isn't a poetic warning, it's a spiritual law. When that line is crossed, consequences don't simply show up, they accelerate. God doesn't allow his soft-hearted ones to become emotional playgrounds for the spiritually reckless. And when people take advantage of someone gentle, thinking they can do whatever they want without fear, heaven steps in with a response that cannot be ignored. They thought you had no backup. They thought your quiet meant defeat. They thought your peace meant passivity. Now heaven is using them as an example of what happens when cruelty mistakes gentleness for weakness. And that lesson is being delivered loud and clear. Number 7, they didn't just mistreat you. They attempted to rewrite the meaning of your existence. Mistreatment alone is evil, but what they did went far beyond simple cruelty. They tried to alter the very definition of who you were. They weren't satisfied with hurting your feelings or disrupting your peace. They wanted to reshape the way the world saw you. They tried to turn your identity into a distorted story that benefited them. They wanted people to believe you were the troublemaker, the unstable one, the difficult one, the unpredictable one. They needed to paint you as the storm so they could play the role of calm, innocent victims standing in the rain. But here's the truth they refused to face. You weren't the problem. You exposed the problem. Your presence made their pretenses collapse. Your honesty made their lies shake. Your spirit made their shallowness obvious. Instead of learning from you, they tried to eliminate the version of you that threatened their comfort. They tried to rewrite your existence because confronting the real you would have forced them to confront themselves. And that's exactly where they crossed into territory God takes personally. When someone attacks your character, they're not just insulting you. They're insulting the one who created you. They're acting like they have the authority to rename what he already defined. They're trying to override divine design with human insecurity. That's not just disrespect, it's rebellion. They used gossip, exaggeration, half-truths and flat-out lies to build a version of you that never existed. They made you sound dangerous, unpredictable, or emotionally messy, all while ignoring the fact that their behavior is what created chaos in the first place. They needed you to look guilty so they could feel justified. But God doesn't stay silent when someone tries to rewrite his work. He steps in. He dismantles false narratives. He exposes the hidden motives. He corrects the lies with proof, timing, elevation, and clarity. And the same mouth that tried to define you will now be forced to acknowledge the truth of who you really are. They tried to rewrite your identity. God is rewriting their influence. And number 8, God is furious because they turned your life into a battlefield while pretending to be helpless spectators. There's a unique kind of evil in people who cause chaos, then act like they had nothing to do with it. They weren't clueless. They weren't confused. They weren't innocent. They were the ones lighting the matches, pushing the buttons, whispering the lies, and stirring the tension, then standing in the background acting shocked when the fire spread. They crafted the drama, but pretended to be horrified by the outcome. They set the trap, but insisted they had no idea how you got caught in it. That level of hypocrisy carries a spiritual stench that heaven does not overlook. These people didn't stumble into harming you. They were deliberate. They orchestrated the emotional injuries while pretending to be bystanders. They acted as if life was just happening to them, as if situations magically spiraled out of control without their fingerprints all over the destruction. And when you finally reacted, when you finally showed the exhaustion, hurt, or frustration that anyone would feel, they put on their performance, wide eyes, innocent expressions. What did we do? Energy, knowing full well they were the architects of your suffering. That's why God's anger is fierce. He doesn't just judge actions, he judges intention. And their intention was to sabotage you without ever being held accountable. They wanted the world to see them as calm, peaceful individuals caught in someone else's storm, while secretly bragging about the damage they caused. They loved playing the victim because it allowed them to escape responsibility and gain sympathy at the same time. But heaven has never been fooled by false innocence. God has more tolerance for open wickedness than he does for hidden hypocrisy. At least a wicked person is honest about who they are. These people, however, hid their cruelty behind a mask, expecting God and everyone else to clap for their performance. Hypocrisy like that exposes a soul that's spiritually empty, morally hollow, and completely disconnected from truth. They turned your life into a battlefield, then acted like they were just watching the war. That's the part God refuses to let slide. Someone who creates pain and then plays confused when confronted is exactly the kind of person heaven deals with publicly. The mask they wore is cracking now, and their real nature is being revealed. Not because you wanted revenge, but because God is tired of their act. Number 9, heaven intervenes when injustice becomes a public ritual. There's a difference between one person acting out of jealousy or bitterness and an entire group coming together to mistreat someone who never wronged them. What happened to you wasn't a quiet betrayal or a hidden offense. It became a collective performance. They didn't just hurt you in private and move on. They turned your pain into something they could bond over, gossip about, laugh at, and pass around like entertainment. It became a ritual for them, a regular activity, almost a hobby. And that's the point where heaven steps in, because injustice that becomes a spectacle is a direct violation of spiritual order. They weren't slipping up, they were teaming up. They gathered in private conversations, shared dirty looks, swapped stories about you, exaggerated everything, and fed off each other's negativity. The mistreatment became a group project, and the cruelty became a community. They made your suffering a talking point, a joke, a highlight, a reference, and the more they participated, the bolder they became. The more they laughed, the more they tore at your spirit. The more they agreed with each other, the more they convinced themselves their behavior was justified. But heaven saw the group, not just one person, not just one action. Every participant, every enabler, every instigator, every spectator who stood by silently, heaven counted them all. A spiritual line is crossed when cruelty becomes communal. When harming someone becomes a group event, the judgment doesn't fall on an individual, it falls on the collective. God does not overlook coordinated evil. He doesn't ignore people who unite over someone's downfall. Group mistreatment carries a heavier weight because it shows that multiple hearts agreed to violate what was sacred. And here's where their plan backfired. Every time they laughed at your pain, they made the judgment against themselves heavier. Every time they encouraged each other, they exposed how spiritually empty they were. Every time they added one more insult or story, they strengthened the case heaven was building. You didn't just endure one person's cruelty, you endured a whole crowd's. And when injustice becomes a ritual, heaven intervenes publicly. The same way they made your pain a spectacle is the same way your vindication will be witnessed. Their unity in wickedness has triggered unity in divine response. Number 10, they underestimated how seriously God takes the protection of the guiltless. They assumed your kindness made you unguarded. They assumed your compassion made you unprotected. They assumed your innocence made you easy to handle, easy to manipulate, easy to use, and easy to break. What they didn't understand is that God places a different kind of covering over those whose hearts are clean. And once that covering is violated, the consequences shift from personal to divine. You were never meant to suffer at the level they dragged you into. The depth of your pain wasn't a part of God's plan. It was a result of their choices. Your heart wasn't built for betrayal, humiliation, or cruelty. You were wired for service, purpose, and impact. Yet they kept crossing lines you didn't even know existed. Lines heaven set to protect the innocent from the spiritually reckless. And here's the part they never considered. God always warns before he acts. Those subtle hesitations they felt before doing you wrong. Those uneasy feelings, those dreams, those strange delays, those moments they didn't feel right crossing certain boundaries. Those were heaven's silent alarms, divine cautions, spiritual red flags, warnings that harming you would cost them more than they could afford. But ignorance made them confident, pride made them blind, ego made them bold. They ignored every warning, every sign, every instinct telling them, "Don't touch this one." And when people ignore divine caution, the aftermath becomes catastrophic. Not because God is cruel, but because God takes the protection of the innocent as a personal responsibility. They weren't just messing with you. They were tampering with something heaven guarded. They weren't just hurting your feelings. They were damaging someone God set apart. The moment they violated that covering, they activated consequences they cannot escape, pause, or negotiate. Divine justice doesn't miss its target, and it never arrives empty-handed. They underestimated you because they didn't understand who was standing behind you. They underestimated the cost of provoking someone who carries purity. They underestimated the spiritual laws that defend the guiltless. But now the balance is being restored, not through revenge, but through divine correction. Their actions wrote the verdict. Heaven is simply enforcing it. Number 11. God's anger is not about punishing them. It's about restoring the dignity they stripped from you. God is not driven by rage. He is driven by justice. The anger you're seeing unfold is not rooted in revenge. It's rooted in restoration. What happened to your name was not accidental. It was intentional, coordinated, and repeated. They twisted your identity until it barely resembled the truth. They mocked your character with confidence. They dragged your name through conversations, group chats, and whispers that were meant to shrink your worth. They were determined to stain what God created clean, and God took that personally. Your dignity was never meant to be a public sacrifice for their entertainment. Your character was never designed to be their playground. They used your name as a tool to elevate their own egos, control narratives, and earn sympathy. But in doing so, they underestimated something critical. God does not allow the innocent to remain misdefined. When someone lies on a chosen one, they're not just distorting a reputation, they're attempting to rewrite something God authored. That's why the restoration coming to your name is not quiet or subtle, it's undeniable. Heaven is correcting the narrative they created. Every lie spoken about you is being replaced with truth. Every rumor they built is being dismantled piece by piece. Every false impression they spread is turning into a revelation of who you truly are. And the people who once repeated the lies will find themselves repeating the truth with a different tone. People will speak your name with caution now, not because you're dangerous, but because they've realized God Himself is invested in how you are spoken about. That awareness creates a different kind of respect, one that cannot be faked or forced. It's the respect that comes from witnessing divine correction in real time. Your reputation is being lifted, your dignity is being repaired, your identity is being restored to its rightful position, not by your hands, not by your explanations, and not by your defense, but by God's intervention. They tried to stain you permanently, but heaven has the final edit. Your name will rise in ways that leave no doubt that God was the one rewriting the script. Number 12. They expected you to collapse, but you kept rising, and that is why divine justice has accelerated. They counted on your breaking point. They studied your wounds more than your will. They predicted your downfall with confidence because in their world, pain destroys people. They didn't understand that in your world, pain reveals who you truly are. Every time they expected to see you crumble, you somehow stood up again, not because you were strong every day, but because heaven refused to let you stay on the ground. They were watching for the moment you would snap, fold, disappear, or surrender. They were waiting to see the shame swallow you whole, but you didn't give them the performance they imagined. You didn't spiral the way they hoped. You didn't crumble the way they planned. You rose in ways that confused them, irritated them, and eventually terrified them, because your rising exposed just how weak their attacks actually were. What they didn't know is that heaven pays attention to pressure. God doesn't just watch what harms you, He records how you respond. And every time you got back up, you were making a spiritual statement they didn't realize they were being judged by. Your resilience became the courtroom, your endurance became the witness, and your silence became the evidence that convicted them. They thought surviving made you stubborn. They didn't realize surviving made you chosen. Your rising didn't just irritate them, it accelerated the divine timeline. Because once God sees that your heart stayed clean despite the hits, and your character stayed intact despite the betrayals, judgment is no longer delayed. Justice speeds up. Consequences become unavoidable. Heaven moves quickly when innocence refuses to die. Your survival became their indictment. Not because you sought revenge, but because your endurance destroyed the lie that they had any real power over your destiny. You outlived the traps. You outlasted the rumors. You outgrew the pain they weaponized against you. And now the same resilience they mocked is the reason God is moving swiftly on your behalf. They expected to witness your collapse, but instead, they're witnessing your elevation. Number 13. Heaven is furious because they tried to bury someone whose purpose was never meant to be underground. They didn't just hurt you. They interfered with something heaven scheduled. Your life wasn't random. You were carrying assignments, breakthroughs, and generational responsibilities that required your presence, clarity, and strength. When they tried to bury you emotionally, mentally, spiritually, or socially, they weren't just attacking a person. They were disrupting a divine timeline. And that is something heaven responds to with severity. What they didn't understand is that your existence is not optional. You weren't placed here to fill space. You were positioned to shift it. Your voice carries instructions for people you haven't even met yet. Your growth unlocks blessings that ripple into the lives of others. So when they tried to suffocate you under pain, confusion, or humiliation, heaven took it as an attempt to silence an instrument God planned to use. You were supposed to be moving at a certain pace, healing, discovering, building, elevating, but their betrayal, cruelty, manipulation, and sabotage slowed that process down. And heaven sees delayed purpose as an offense, not because God is impatient, but because your calling is connected to others who depend on your light. When someone attacks you, they attack what heaven intended to send through you. Your pain had weight. It affected doors, relationships, alignments, and decisions that were meant to happen sooner. That's why the wrath is so intense, not because you were hurt, but because the hurt created spiritual interference. God avenges interruptions to his assignments. He doesn't tolerate anyone stepping between him and the mission he placed on your life. They thought they were burying you, silencing you, or putting you in your place. They didn't realize burying a chosen one is a spiritual insult. You were never designed for the dirt. You were designed for the forefront. And heaven doesn't let anyone misplace you without consequences. Now the same pressure that tried to bury you is becoming the force pushing you upward. And heaven is clearing everything and everyone that tried to delay what was already written for you. Number 14. Their treatment of you forced God to demand public honor on your name. They dragged your name in front of an audience, so God decided your restoration would have an audience too. Nothing about what happened to you was private. Your pain was discussed, exaggerated, analyzed, and spread like a rumor that refused to die. People didn't just mistreat you. They performed it. They showcased it. They made you a storyline in a drama they created. And because they tried to stain your identity in public, heaven has chosen to cleanse it in public as well. God isn't restoring you quietly, because quiet wouldn't match what was done to you. Quiet wouldn't expose the lies. Quiet wouldn't correct the false images people were confidently believing. Quiet wouldn't teach the lesson that heaven is determined to teach. Touching an innocent soul comes with consequences you cannot hide from. The elevation coming to your name isn't a reward, it's a correction. It's God resetting the narrative they tried to control. It's divine insistence that the truth about you must be known, not whispered. The same people who laughed at your downfall will now see your rise with their own eyes, not because you need their validation, but because God wants the reversal to be undeniable. Their disrespect created the stage. Their gossip built the platform. Their mockery set the spotlight. They thought they were shaming you, but they were unintentionally building the environment where God would showcase his vindication. They pushed you into a public spotlight. And now heaven is using that same spotlight to illuminate who you actually are. The honor coming to your name isn't arrogance, it's justice. It's heaven restoring what was stolen and repairing what was warped. Every lie spoken about you is now standing in direct conflict with the reality God is bringing forward. People will rethink their assumptions. They will question their participation. They will feel the weight of realizing they sided with the wrong narrative. Your name is entering a new season, one where dignity is mandatory, respect is automatic, and honor is God-ordained. The script is no longer in human hands. Heaven has taken over the writing, and every page now leads to restoration they can't stop, hide, or deny. Conclusion. Everything you endured was not ignored, misunderstood, or overlooked. Heaven recorded every tear, every betrayal, every smear, every trap, every false accusation, and every wound inflicted on you when your heart had done nothing to deserve the assault. You weren't just mistreated, you were targeted because of the assignment you carry, the light you walk with, and the spiritual authority they sensed long before you even recognized it in yourself. They crossed divine boundaries, believing there would be no consequences, believing heaven would stay silent, believing your suffering would secure their superiority. But what they did not understand is that God does not tolerate cruelty toward the innocent, especially when that innocence is tied to a purpose that influences generations. Every attack against you became an attack against the timing, the mission, and the destiny heaven entrusted you with. Their cruelty exposed their intentions. Their manipulation exposed their character. Their hypocrisy exposed their motives. And your endurance exposed your true identity. You didn't rise because you had the strength. They gave heaven every reason to lift you. You didn't survive because you were lucky. You survived because your purpose refused to die beneath their weight. Now the very humiliation they thought would bury you has become the platform for your elevation. The disrespect they projected onto your name has forced heaven to demand public honor. The interference they created in your life became the reason God accelerated his justice. Every reversal you are stepping into is not random. It is divine correction. It is heaven restoring what never should have been touched. You were not the victim they painted. You were the assignment they underestimated. And in this season, God is not only clearing your name, he is rewriting your story for all to see. The vindication will be visible. The honor will be undeniable. The rise will be unforgettable. And the same people who once dismissed you will become the witnesses to your restoration. If this message spoke to your spirit today, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and share this with someone who needs this level of truth and encouragement. Your support helps this message reach more chosen souls who are walking through the same fire you've overcome. Stay blessed always.